In October of 1907, the most powerful economy on Earth had no central bank, no Federal Reserve, no lender of last resort. So when the panic came, when the runs started and the cash simply vanished, there was no institution standing by to stop it. There was one man. He was 70 years old, and what he did over the next 3 weeks frightened Congress into building the system we still rely on today. So what actually broke? Let's start in the autumn of 1907. To understand the panic, you first have to understand what was missing. Most wealthy countries had a central bank, an institution that could create money in a crisis and lend it to banks in trouble. The United States did not. President Andrew Jackson had killed the country's last central bank back in 1836, and for more than 70 years, Americans had lived without one. Most of the time, the system worked, but every autumn money grew tight as farmers pulled cash from the cities to move the harvest, and the whole of banking ran lean. In 1907, it was running on almost nothing. At the center of the story were the trusts. A trust company was like a bank, but only lightly regulated. It could take deposits and make riskier bets, and in the boom years before the panic, that is exactly what they did. In the single decade before 1907, the assets of New York's trust companies grew by 244%, more than double the growth of the ordinary national banks. And here is the quiet weakness. A trust was allowed to keep far less cash in reserve than a national bank, so in a panic it ran dry much faster. They were the hot, fast, underwatched corner of American finance. And like every hot corner of finance, they were far more fragile than they looked. The spark came from a reckless bet. A copper magnate named Augustus Heinze, together with a Wall Street banker named Charles Morse, tried to corner the stock of the United Copper Company to buy up its shares and squeeze anyone betting against them. On October 14th, they began buying. 2 days later, the corner collapsed. United Copper crashed, the Heinze brothers' brokerage went under, and the failure exposed an alarming fact. Heinze and Morse sat on the boards of banks and trusts all over the city. Suddenly, depositors started to wonder whose money was tangled up with the men who had just lost everything. Fear is the real engine of a banking panic, and fear is contagious. A bank run is simple and merciless. Depositors who fear a collapse rush to pull their cash first, and because no bank keeps every dollar on hand, the rush itself causes the failure. Runs began at the banks linked to Heinze and Morse. The New York Clearing House, a private club of the big national banks, examined those banks, declared them solvent, and forced the two men out. And for a moment, the runs on the national banks were quieted. But the panic did not stop. It jumped the fence. It spread to the trusts, the lightly regulated cousins who were not members of the Clearing House and who had no one organized to defend them. The first to fall was a giant. The Knickerbocker Trust Company was the third largest trust in New York, run by a respected financier named Charles Barney. When news broke that Barney had been tied to Morse, depositors panicked. On October 21st, the Clearing House refused to rescue it because Knickerbocker was not a member. The next day, the run was so violent that within hours the trust had paid out everything it could and shut its doors. The third largest trust in the city was gone, and now every depositor in New York was asking the same question: which one is next? Now the panic reached the heart of the market. Trust after trust faced a run. The interest rate to borrow money overnight on the stock exchange spiked toward 100%, because almost no one would lend at any price. Gold was rushed in by ship from Europe to refill the banks, but it crossed the ocean too slowly to matter in the moment. Stocks had nowhere to go but down. By the depths of the panic, the New York Stock Exchange had fallen almost 50% from its high the year before. The Dow Jones average sliding from 103 down toward 53. A modern economy was seizing up in real time, and there was no central bank to turn on the tap. With no institution to act, the job fell to a person. John Pierpont Morgan was the most powerful banker in America, and at 70 years old he had seen panics before. He had personally helped rescue the U.S. Treasury itself a decade earlier in the Panic of 1893. When the crisis hit, he was out of town. He rushed back to the city, and his private library on Madison Avenue became the command center of the entire financial system. Bank presidents and trust executives streamed through its doors. Morgan would listen, decide which institutions could be saved, and then organize the money to save them. For 3 weeks, one elderly man's library did the job a central bank is supposed to do. The most dangerous moment came on Thursday, October 24th. The president of the stock exchange came to Morgan and told him he would have to close the exchange early because the brokers had no money to settle their trades. Morgan said closing it would be a catastrophe. He summoned the city's bank presidents to his office and told them that as many as 50 brokerage houses would fail unless $25 million was raised in the next 10 minutes. Within 15 minutes, 14 bank presidents had pledged $23.6 million. The cash reached the exchange floor in time to keep it open. The market had been pulled back from the edge by a margin measured in minutes. Money alone was not enough. The panic was a crisis of confidence, and confidence had to be manufactured. The Federal Treasury helped, depositing government funds, by some accounts around $25 million, into the strongest New York banks to give them ammunition. Morgan's Circle formed committees, one to persuade the city's clergy to calm their congregations from the pulpit on Sunday, another to feed reassuring explanations to the newspapers. The richest men in America were not just moving money. They were, quite deliberately, trying to talk a terrified public out of pulling the rest of it. The last great threat came in early November. A major brokerage, Moore & Schley, was drowning in debt, and it had borrowed against the stock of a steel company, Tennessee Coal and Iron. If the brokerage collapsed, that stock would be dumped, and the panic could begin all over again. Morgan's solution was audacious. He arranged for U.S. Steel, the giant he had helped build, to buy Tennessee Coal and Iron outright, propping up the stock and saving the brokerage. It worked. By the middle of November, the panic of 1907 was finally over. And here is the part that mattered most. The rescue had worked. But look closely at how it worked. The entire financial system of the United States had been saved in a private library by the personal fortune and sheer will of one man's circle of friends. That was not reassuring. That was terrifying, because the obvious question hung in the air. What happens next time, when the panic is worse, or when there is no Morgan to call? A nation cannot rest its banking system on the life and the goodwill of a single elderly banker. Everyone who lived through it understood that something had to change. The damage was real, and it was wide. The panic sat in the middle of a sharp recession that the National Bureau of Economic Research dates from May of 1907 to June of 1908. Industrial production fell further than after any previous bank run in the country's history. Businesses failed, output dropped, and workers lost their jobs, all because the financial plumbing had no emergency valve. The lesson was expensive, and the country had paid it in full. So Washington went looking for an answer. In 1908, Congress passed the Aldrich-Vreeland Act, which created a National Monetary Commission, a body tasked with one question: how do we make sure this never happens again? For years, the commission studied how other nations handled crises, traveling through Europe to examine the central banks the United States had spent 70 years refusing to build. The politics were fierce, between those who feared concentrated financial power and those who feared the chaos of having none. Out of that long fight came two names that still echo in American finance: Senator Nelson Aldrich and a congressman named Carter Glass, who would help shape the law that followed. But the direction was set. The answer arrived 6 years after the panic. On December 23, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act into law. It created a true central bank for the United States, a permanent institution with the power to lend to banks in a crisis, and to expand the money supply when the system ran dry. The lender of last resort that did not exist in 1907, the role one aging banker had filled by hand, was now written into law. The thing Morgan's library had improvised would never again depend on one man being in town. So what can we learn from the panic of 1907? Not that one man saved the day, and not that any single villain caused it. The honest lesson is structural. A modern economy is a vast machine of borrowed promises, and when fear spreads, it needs an institution that can step in and act as a lender of last resort. In 1907, that institution did not exist, so the role fell to a person, and the country saw exactly how dangerous that was. The fix was not a better banker. The fix was a system designed so that the next panic would never again come down to whether the right man happened to be in town.